Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see you. It's Rabbi Akiva Males. Today is Wednesday. It's the 25th of November. We're getting ready for Parshas Vayetze. I want to share some sources on the Parsha this week that I found, I think, helped me finally put to rest. I shouldn't say put to rest, but it was relieving to see some sources that finally addressed a couple of issues that I had kind of wondered about every year when Parshas Vayetze would roll around. So let's jump right in. So you'll see on if you have either the Mar Makomos, you have the source sheet that went out in the email, or you'll see what's on the screen. You'll see we're going to start here actually with the last two psukim that were in Parshas Toldos last week, and you'll see how that flows into this week, Vayetze, and why it's relevant to Vayetze as well. So here's the last two psukim in Parshas Toldos. It says, "Vayar Esav kiros benos Canaan b'nei Yitzchak aviv." After we're told this is when they were about 40 years old or so. We're told that Esav sees that his parents are not interested in the local girls. How does he know that? Because they've just sent Yaakov away. They told Yaakov, "Go to Lavan's house to find yourself a wife." And Rivka made an impassioned plea about how disgusted she is by the Benos Canaan, about the local girls. So Esav, now that he sees how his mother and his father, how they feel about the local women, so he's going to take a step to marry someone else from outside the locals. So Tess, Vayelech Esav el Yishmael, so he goes to his uncle Yishmael, because remember, Yitzchak's brother was Yishmael. So Esav goes to his brother, to his uncle Yishmael, Vayikaches Machalas bas Yishmael, and he takes as a wife Machalas, who's a daughter of Yishmael, so this would be a cousin, Ben Avraham, and just remember what's Yishmael's yichus, he's the son of Avraham, Achos Nevayos al Nashav lo Elisha. So this girl Machalas was a brother of Nevayos, and that's who he marries. That's who Esav marries at the end of last week's Parsha, and that's how the Parsha concludes. Let's see Rashi. Rashi on that pasuk says Achos Nevayos. Why is it identifying it as saying that this Machalas was a sister of Nevayos? You've already told me that she's a daughter of Yishmael. Why you got to identify him? So let's see what Rashi says. If I already know that she is a daughter of Yishmael, don't I already know that she's also a sister of Nevayos? Because if Nevayos is a sister of is a son of Yishmael, so if Machalas is now a daughter of Yishmael who Esav marries, obviously she's a sister of Nevayos. So why does the pasuk identify that? Yishmael died once, you could say she was betrothed, or once she was engaged, you might say, to Esav. Kodem Nisuah, before the actual wedding could take place, before the Nisuah could take place. So who walked her down the aisle? Her brother Nevayos. Okay, that's nice. But that's really not what I want to get to this Rashi. Look at the next line. Lamadnu, what else this teaches us is Shaya Yaakov Boso Perak Ben Shishim V'Shalosh Shanim. There's a way to figure out, and Rashi goes into great detail to figure this out, that at this point in the story, Yaakov is going to be 63 years old. That's what he is. That's where he is. So now he says, there's a long Rashi that goes through many equations of the timeline. Now he says, Nimtza, it comes out, Yaakov Kishemes Yishmael ben Shishim v'Shalosh Shanim haya. How old was Yaakov when Yishmael died? He was 63, which means Esav was also 63. Lamanu Mikan, we can also figure out from this, Shenitman Bebeis Aver, Arba Esrei Shana, that Yaakov hid out in the yeshiva of Aver for 14 years, and only after those 14 years he spent learning in the yeshiva of Aver, only then did he continue on his way to Haran to go to Lavan's house. So what do we get out of this? Is that Parshas Toldos ended by telling us that he was going to go to Lavan. His parents told Yaakov to go to Lavan's house to find a wife. And Vayetze begins with that trek. So you might think that this is one right after the next. Is that exactly where Parshas Toldos ends, where his parents tell him, Yaakov's parents tell him, we want you to go to Lavan's house to find a wife. You may have assumed that that's where Vayetze begins. Starts on that trip, and that's where he has the dream with the ladder. So Rashi is telling us Chazal didn't understand it that way. Chazal, using their math to figure out the ages, they deduced that Yaakov spent 14 years in the yeshiva of Aver before he continued on to Lavan's house. Okay, that's what we have from that Rashi. Let's continue a little further. 2 psukim into Parshas Vayetze is pasuk Yud Aleph. So it tells us Vayifga b'makom, that he arrived at the place, according to most commentaries, that's Hara Moriah, that's where the Beis HaMikdash is eventually going to be built. Vayolan Sham, and he lodged there, ki ba shemesh, because the sun went down. Vayikach me'avnei hamakom, he takes some rocks, some stones from the place. Vayasamer ashasav, he puts them around his head. Vayishkav b'makom ahu, and that's where he lays down. So Rashi quotes the Medrash, that the pasuk says what? The pasuk says that Vayifka b'makom, that he says Vayishkav b'makom. He lied down there in that place. So Rashi says Vayishkav b'makom l'shamiyut, saying hahu means in that place. It's exclusionary, meaning bosa makom shachav. That's where he finally allowed himself to lie down and sleep. But the 14 years that he was serving and studying in the academy, in the yeshiva of Aver, lo shachav balayla. He never allowed himself to have a good night's sleep. Shaya osek b'Torah. He was always occupied studying Torah. He may have taken cat naps here and there. He took little winks, but he never allowed himself a good night's sleep. When did he finally allow himself a good night's sleep? So what we're being told is he finally allowed himself a good night's sleep at this point, when it was at Hara Moriah. So for 14 years, he did not allow himself a good night's sleep. So again, from both of these Rashis, what do we see? That Rashi's working with the stream, with the Masorah, with the tradition, that Yaakov spent 14 years hidden in the yeshiva of Aver before he continued on to Lavan's house. Okay. One more place you'll see this is one more source before we get a little further, and we'll tie these together. Seemingly,
Rabbi?
Yes.
I lived in Safat, and where the yeshiva was of Shem and Eber is there in Safat.
We're not 100% sure where those were. In other words, again, we know it was in the land of Israel, but there's really no clear tradition as to where they were. I know there's spots that they say that, but I don't know if this can be proven exactly where those were. But it could be.
It's a cave. Of
Correct.
course, they didn't write their name on the wall.
Right, and that's what they.
That's where
correct, and like a lot of spots in Israel, there's a lot of haziness as to whether or not they can actually ascribe that to them. But again, there are some places, and there's more than one spot. There are places around Israel where various tour guides will tell you where they may have been, but it's not like Kever Rachel or the Maras HaMachpelah. It's not something that we have an absolute tradition on. But 100%, there are different places around Israel where claims have been made over the years. So let's see something else which is not fully related, but you'll see that it becomes related very quickly. So a little bit later, this is actually the first pasuk. The first pasuk in Vayetze, it says, Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheva vayelech Harana. Yaakov left Beersheva and he went to Haran. That's what we're told, that he left Beersheva and he went to Haran. That's how the parsha begins. Let's see two commentaries right at the beginning. Tell us as follows. Vayetze Yaakov, the first is the Das Zakenim. The Das Zakenim, Ibali Tosos, says as follows. Vayetze Yaakov, lefikach parsha zu setuma. This parsha, the parsha of Vayetze, is stuma. Sasu means it is shut. We'll soon see a diagram what that means. Mipnei sheyatza b'tzina mipnei Esav. In order to demonstrate that Yaakov had to kind of sneak out in the cloak of darkness, that's why the parsha of Vayetze is what we call stuma. It is shut. We'll soon see, and I'll explain what that means. One other commentary says almost the same thing, the Baal HaTurim. Vayetze Yaakov, Yesh Omrim, there are those who say, Sheparsha zu stuma, that this parsha is stuma, it is shut. That time, what's the reason? Lefi sheyatza b'seiser, because he left secretly, uvarach be'chavei, and he fled without anybody knowing. What does it mean that it's sasum? So you'll see here is a picture taken from a tikkun. This is what people study from when they're practicing the laning, to lane from the Torah. So you'll see here in the first paragraph, this is where Vayetze begins. You see there's a break in the middle of the column. That's where the last pasuk told us was, where it says that Esav married, it says, Machalas bas Yishmael ben Avraham, Achos Nevayos al Nashav lo Lisha. That's where Parshas told us ended. Then there's a break. We start Vayetze. Until the end of this parsha, there are no breaks. This is very unusual. In the Torah, in a column of all the writing, there will be breaks, sometimes between aliyahs, sometimes when a chapter ends. In the entire parsha of Vayetze, there are no breaks. There are no open spots like that in the column. And I've got here just the next break you'll find. See, I got ... because it goes several columns like this. The next break you'll find is the end of the parsha, where Vayetze begins and Vayetze ends and Vayishlach begins. See, the end of the parsha here, it says, Vayifgu bo malachei Elokim, Vayomer Yaakov kasher ra, that he bumps into these angels when he's getting back towards Israel. And Yaakov says, when he sees Machane Elokim, when he sees this camp of angels, Vayikroshema makomu machanayim. He calls it machanayim. Finally, we've got a break. But until that point, it's sasum. The whole parsha of Vayetze is sasum. It's just a continuous column. Makes it very challenging for a Baal Koreh, for the one who's reading the Torah, because in between aliyahs, he takes a break and he's got to show the next person who's getting called up to the Torah where we're starting. He's got to find the spot again. Again, oftentimes there are breaks, but here there is no break. The entire Parshas Vayetze, there are no breaks in the column, in the script, until you get to the end of the parsha where Vayishlach begins. So what these two commentaries say, both the Das Zakenim and the Balaturim say, is as follows. Why is the Torah written this way? Sounds like what they're writing is, it's written this way to show something. It's telling us a lesson. By the fact everything's in break, it's all incognito, because that's the way Yaakov had to leave. Yaakov left Eretz Yisrael in this very incognito fashion, in a secret manner. It wasn't widespread, it wasn't spoken about, it wasn't publicized. And a way to show that it was assumed that it was all hidden, it was under the radar. That's why the entire parsha of Vayetze is written in a sasum fashion, that it's all blocked. That's what the Das Zakenim and also the Balaturim say. Okay, I just saw that until this year, and I never really thought much about it. I want to share with you a commentary that I saw this year for the first time. We've looked at some of his other comments in the Torah in the previous months, and he connects these points, connects the fact that Yaakov hid out for 14 years in yeshiva of Aver before he fled to Lavan's house, and this idea that the Parsha Sasum, the Parsha of Vayetze, is completely shut as a way of symbolically showing that Yaakov had to leave on the cloak of darkness and in secrecy. And he ties this together in such a beautiful way, but also in a fashion that's going to answer a question that many of us have asked before and thought of before, but I don't know if anyone's ever seen it addressed. This was the first year that I saw it addressed. I'd heard from friends many theories to offer suggestions, but I never saw someone really address it. Let's jump right in. This is from Rav Simcha Zissel Broid. So Rav Simcha Zissel Broid, we used him before. So he passed away in 2000. He served for 40 years as a Rosh Yeshiva and Yeshiva Knesset Yisrael in Hebron, the great Hebron Yeshiva that's now in Yerushalayim. And again, he would have been about the same age group as Memphis' own Dave Shainberg, who was killed at the Hebron Yeshiva during the 1929 riots in Israel. So here's what Rav Simcha says on this. It's going on the pasuk. Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheva vayolech Harana. He left Beersheva and he goes to Haran. Kasvu Rabbeinu Balei Tosos. So he quotes the Balei Tosos. Lefichach Parsha Zu Stuma. This is why this parsha is completely shut, as we showed in those columns. There's no breaks. There's no openings. Because he had to leave secretly because of Esav. Balaturim, he says something similar. That this whole parsha is sasum. So he says, what does that mean? Shein b'chol hasedra lo pesucha lo stuma. In this entire parsha, there's no breaks, there's no openings. Why? Hatam lafish yatsa b'seiser, because Yaakov had to leave secretly. Uvarach bechavei, and he fled without anyone knowing. Ad kan lashono. Divrei kipshutam chasrei havana v'hasber. To just take these words at face value lacks explanation. What connection is there? Because Yaakov had to flee, secretly, without anyone knowing, to the fact that there's a parsha in the Torah that's completely shut. What does one have to do with the other? Now he asks question 2. I've got another question. What do we do with what Chazal teaches us? Yaakov Avinu, after he received the brachos and he runs to Lavan, he did something first. He hid out in the Beis Medrash of Aver for 14 years. Before he leaves to Padan Aram to Lavan's house. It's never spelled out clearly in the Torah. Rashi brings down the Chazal that figure it out when the pasuk says figures out how long Yishmael lived for. Rashi, look at Rashi, figures out that he was 63, and the only way to make everything make sense is to say that for 14 years he hid out in the Beis Medrash of Aver. When you look into this matter, this is actually quite astonishing. If Yaakov is looking to hide, what kind of hiding spot is that? To go to the yeshiva of Aver. Everyone knows it's a famous place. And it's well known. Shalom Dubo, Toras, Rabos, B'Shanim, Talmidim Rabim. Everyone knows that was an academy that Aver taught information about God and Torah, however you're going to classify Torah at a time before the Torah was given. It was God and moral living. That's a place that Aver, it was a bastion of study. That's where everyone went. And more than that, when Yaakov was a kid, it says he was Yoshev Ohalim, that he had spent time in the yeshiva of Shem and in the yeshiva of Aver. Al pi seichel, according to logic, Hamakom Harishon Shaya Esav Tzarich Lechapes. The first place that Esav would have searched for Yaakov if he's looking to get his hands on him, Boaz Yaakov Yoshev Ohalim. Where would he look for Yaakov who's Yoshev Ohalim? We said he was academic. He was a bookworm. You go to the library. He would have gone to the tent, to the Academy of Shem, the Academy of Aver. So how did such a miracle occur? That for 14 years, how did he hide out for 14 years in the yeshiva of Aver without Esav ever catching wind of this? Hello, Pelo, this is astonishing. And you also have to understand, why didn't the Torah tell us straight out that he didn't go right to Lavan. He first went to Aver's yeshiva, and he was hidden there for 14 years. Why didn't the Torah tell us this? These are great questions. I never really stopped to think about it. But again, if he's got to hide, you'd think that's the worst place to hide. So let's see, what does Rav Simcha Zissel do? He says, "If a Torah kovas is mitzios harag," he goes, I once wrote a discourse that was titled that the Torah establishes what is the nature of our world. I explained this matter based on a principle I established there. Every letter that's written in the Torah, even the way the parshios are written, that sets the template, and that establishes the laws of nature and everything that goes on in this world. Remember, we have this idea that God looked into the Torah and then created the world. The Torah is the blueprint of our world. So he says as follows, therefore, what's in the Torah and the way, the fashion in which the Torah is written, that establishes the laws of nature. He says, Gam tsuras ha-parshios shebetorah. That means even the appearance of the parshios of the Torah. Kigom psucha o stuma, whether they are open or whether they are closed, kovim metzios ba'olam. That also establishes the nature of the world. When God chooses to write something in the Torah, ba'ofen sasum, in a closed fashion, zehu muvan shel hester v'helen. That's understood to mean that there was something hidden, something secretive. Uchepoel yotze mikach, and what's the result of that? If it was written that way in the Torah, and the Torah is the blueprint of the world, then the result of that means that nikvas notzeres ba'olam mitzir shel hester v'helen. If it was written in a way that connotes hiddenness, that connotes secrecy, the result of that is that there will be secrecy, and the matter will remain hidden. That explains how did such a miracle occur? That for 14 years Hitzliach Yaakov Avinu lisaser bebeis Ever. For 14 years, he was able to remain incognito, to fly under the radar screen and hide out in the yeshiva of Ever, that Esav would never find out. Well, according to what we said, this makes sense. This is exactly what we're getting at. Because the Torah is the blueprint of our world, and the way things are written in the Torah dictates the way that world events will play out. Yaakov was able to remain hidden, both in Peli in an astonishing fashion, to hang out there in the yeshiva of Ever for 14 years. Because of the fact that his actions, his activities in those 14 years, from the time he received the blessings, until he left the Lavan, because it wasn't written straight out in the Torah. Notice, again, Simcha doesn't want to tell, why didn't the Torah record it? You know why the Torah didn't record it? The Torah wanted it to remain hidden, because Hashem didn't want Esav to catch wind of it. So Hashem specifically left it out of the Torah. Lo nichtav mefurish b'Torah. Hashem did not write it in the Torah. Ela b'derech shel remez v'elam. It was only hinted to in a very hidden fashion. What was the results of that? Notzra. That created the reality. Ba'olam mitzius shel hester v'helem hecha nimtza Yaakov Avinu. That the result of that was that nobody in the world knew where Yaakov was for those 14 years. And Esav, despite all of his efforts trying to hunt him down, could not find him. Even though it was right before him, it was right in front of his face. He was hidden in plain sight. But God, by not writing it in the Torah is the blueprint of the world. So by the fact that it remained hidden, meant that Esav would never find him. He says, now this all explains everything. Divrei Rabbeinu Balei Tosas Balei Turim. This explains what is it that the Balei Turim and Balei Tosas were saying. The Balei Turim and Balei Tosas are saying, why is this parsha written in a sasum, in a very closed fashion? There's no accident. It was written in that closed fashion because Yaakov left secretly. Meaning what? Because Hashem did not want Esav to know his whereabouts. Because he wanted him to be incognito, to be under the radar screen. That's why the Torah was written, this parsha, in a sasum, in a very closed fashion. And that would result, that's the blueprints for making sure that Yaakov remains incognito. He's explaining to us. In other words, it's not because Yaakov left incognito, that's why the Torah was written that way. It's the opposite. The Torah was written this way before the world was created to make sure that when Yaakov needed to hide, Esav would never be able to find him. This dictated the laws of nature that were going to play itself out. And he says, V'davar zeh nifla mod. This is amazing. Ki be'etzem Yotze Seichel Minyan Shnoso Shel Yishmalu Parshas Vayetze Loisei Machlas Basra Nechtam B'Torah. In other words, in order to figure out this, Hashem had to write what was the years that Yishmael lived and the fact that Esav got married. So based on that, we'll figure out Nechtam B'Torah Ach V'Rak. The only reason why that information was written in the Torah about how long Yishmael lived and that Esav married his daughter was only written Kidei l'Ramos u'laha'alim behem es hatmanaso. It was written to hint to us the fact that he was hidden, but also by writing it in this very hinting fashion, in a very hidden fashion, that was making the metzius, making the reality that Yaakov would successfully be able to remain hidden. That he would be able to remain hidden. I thought this was amazing because, again, I think I've had this question in the past, the question of, again, if someone tells you that your kid who loves the library can't be found, where's the first place you're going to look for him? In the library. Your kid who loves the candy store can't be found, go to the candy store. The kid who loves the baseball field, you go to the baseball field. So Yaakov, the Torah tells us about him. He was Yoshev Olim. He loved the tents, the tents of Aver, the tents of Shem. He loved studying about God with them. Why didn't Esav look there? Isn't that a really bad place to hide for 14 years? Good question. And I don't think I ever saw anyone address this. But Simcha Zissel is addressing this. He's saying, yes, Esav did not look there. It was a miracle. But what could have caused such a miracle? The very way that the Torah wrote this in such a hidden fashion. The Torah didn't come straight out and dictate to us where Yaakov was. By not writing it in a clear fashion, the Torah was dictating the metzius, the reality of the world, that it would remain hidden, even though it's hidden in plain sight. And that's what the Balaturim and the Das Sakanim are getting at when they say because it was secretive, that's why it's Sasum, meaning because God wanted it to be secretive. That's why he fashioned the Torah that this parsha should be written in a Sasum, in a closed fashion. That would create the reality that this would remain hidden. I thought this is fascinating, and it works with that principle that the Torah, in fact, is the blueprints to our world. And the way things are written in the Torah, that's going to dictate what the outcome is going to be. And that's how Rav Simcha Zissel wanted to explain this. I thought this was an absolutely fascinating idea. I want to go on. Something is related to this. We just said that he was hiding out for 14 years. Where was he hiding? If you would have asked me, I would have said, yeah, in the yeshiva of Shem and Aver. Because everyone always lumps them together. Everyone, I know I always did. I always said the yeshiva of Shem and Aver. But that's not what Rashi said. If you look back at that Rashi, what Rashi said, he quoted the Midrash and says, where was he those 14 years? Rashi says, Aval Arba'as Shanim Sheshamash Bebeis Aver, in the yeshiva of Aver. That's where he was. So all of a sudden it hit me is that I wanted to do a little bit of homework. There are times that we refer to both of them together, the yeshiva of Shem, the yeshiva of Aver. There's times we refer just to the yeshiva of Aver. There's times we refer just to Shem. And I wanted to get some clarity. So let's go through these sources. I want to share with you, I'm starting on, this is going to be on page 4. I want to show you a number of sources where sometimes you'll see Chazal refer to it as yeshiva of Shem, yeshiva of Aver, sometimes just Shem, sometimes just Aver. And I want to look for a source that can help us make sense of this. Why sometimes it's both, why sometimes it's one and not the other, or vice versa. So let's see the first time this concept comes up is in Parshas Toldos, right at the beginning last week. It tells us, so Rivka didn't know she was pregnant with twins. It tells us that the kids were struggling in her stomach. Again, she doesn't know it's twins. She thinks it's one very confused child. And she says, V'tomrim kein lama ze anochi, if I'm experiencing all this discomfort, what did I need this for? V'telech lidrosh Hashem. So she goes to consult God. So let's see what Rashi says. Rashi quotes the Medrash, Vayisrotzitzu. Rashi says, Rabbeinu Darshu, the way the rabbis understood this is Lashon Ritza. It's an expression of running or jogging. Kishaisa veres al pischei, when she went by the doors, pischei is plural. When she went by the doors, pischei Torah shel Shem ve'ever, meaning they had two different yeshivas. When she went by the doors of Torah of Shem and that of Aver, these were two separate academies, two separate tents. They were not the same yeshiva. Again, I always had assumed the yeshiva Shem and Aver. These were two separate places. When she went by the psachim, she went by the doorways of Shem and of Aver. Yaakov ratzum efraches, let's say. Yaakov would start jogging with his little feet, kicking to get out. Overas al pischei avodah zara, but when she would walk by an idolatrous place, Esav mefraches, let's say. Esav would start jogging to go out. So she doesn't know they're twins. She thinks she's got one really confused child whose soul is being pulled in both directions. So next Rashi, Vatelech lidrosh. So she wants to consult God. So how does she consult God? It says, Lebeis midrasho shel Shem. She goes to the base medrash of Shem. Shem, the son of Noach, he's a Navi. He should give her some guidance as to what's going on here. Again, what happened to Aver? So we said there was two places. There was yeshiva of Shem, yeshiva and Aver. Now she wants an answer about her kid. What's going on with this developing bambino? And who does she go to? She goes to Shem. Why specifically Shem? Okay, let's see a little further. Pasuk of Zion. This was again last week in Toldos. Vayigdelu anarim. The kids grow up. Vayesav ish yodei etzayid. Ish sadeh. Esav's a man of the field. He enjoys hunting. Yaakov ish tam yoshev alim. And Yaakov is a very calm, simple man. And he's Yoshev Olim, he likes to dwell in Ohalim, is plural, tents. So Rashi quotes the Medrash. What is tents in the plural? Yoshev Olim, Ohalo Shel Shem. Again, these are two different yeshivas. The tent of Shem, Ohalo Shel Aver, and also the yeshiva of Aver. So where could Yaakov be found? If he wasn't in one place, he was in the other. These were two separate places. The yeshiva of Shem and the yeshiva of Aver, two separate tents. So if he wasn't in one, he was in the other. So again, here we've got they're discussed each one separately. Let's look at, again, this is the pasuk we started with this week. This was the last pasuk in Toldos last week. Tes, Vayelech Esav el Yishmael, that Esav goes to Yishmael to get married to his daughter. V'yikaches machalas bas Yishmael ben Avram achos nevayos al neshav lo lisha. And he marries the daughter of Yishmael. So again, that Rashi we started with today. that Rashi uses this episode to figure out how old they were, but also Nimsa Yaakov Kishemesi Shma ben Shishim Mishal Shanma. He was 63 years old. The Lamanu Mikan, we learned from him Shenitman Bebeis Aver. Where did he go to yeshiva for 14 years? The yeshiva of Aver, Arbas Rishana, Ve'achar Kach Halach L'Cholam. Then he goes to Charan. What happened to Shem? All of a sudden, we're just mentioning Aver. One more spot where you see that come up is in this week. In the second Parshas Vayetze, it says, and we saw this again earlier, that he arrives at that place, which is Har Moriah, where the Beis Hamikdash is going to be built. Vayolan Sham, and he lodges there. Kiba Shamish, because the sun goes down. He takes some of the stones, he puts them on his head. And he finally goes to sleep and lies down at that place. Rashi says, it says, he says, there he lay down. That's exclusionary. To say, there he finally lay down. The 14 years that he was serving and studying in the Beis Aver, again, Beis Aver, lo shachav balayla. He didn't get a good night's sleep at night. He was always busy learning. So again, here we have this, you clearly see only Aver. So what's going on? We have times, again, going back to his very origins. When his mother is pregnant with him, we're told that she goes by the doorways of Shem and Aver, meaning two different doorways, and the baby wants to come out. So I know that they're both there. We're told when he was a little kid, he was Yoshevo Alim, that he was commonly found in different tents. What were they? Sometimes a tent of Shem, sometimes a tent of Aver. We're told that Rivka rather, when she's confused about this pregnancy, she goes to be Lidroshes Hashem, and Rashi quotes the Medrash that who did she go to? Shem. Only Shem, not Aver. And then we're told that before Yaakov goes to Lavan's house, he hides out for 14 years in yeshiva. Which yeshiva? Yeshiva of Aver. So what's going on? Why were they two yeshivas? If there were two yeshivas, why does Rivka specifically go to Shem for information about her son? If there were two yeshivas, why when Yaakov is growing up, he's hanging out in both of them? But then before he goes to Lavan's house, he's got to go 14 years. He just goes to Aver, not Shem. What's going on? How do we make sense of all this? So finally this year, I took note. I don't think I ever really took notice of this before. I just always lumped them together. Shem and Aver, yeshiva Shem Aver, like it was one yeshiva. It's very clear from Chazal, these were two different yeshivas. And it's also very clear that at different points in the lives of our avos and imos, they made use of one and not the other. So how do we make sense of this? Why are they sometimes grouped together? And why at different points in the careers and experiences of our avos and imos, why do they sometimes go to Shem, sometimes go to Aver? And I saw a beautiful commentary that takes all of this in a couple very short lines, and he makes sense of everything. Let's see the Sifsei Chachamim. The Sifsei Chachamim is a commentary on Rashi, and this is actually on the last Rashi in Parshas Toldos, where it says that by telling us that that Esav married the daughter of Yishmael, we could figure out that Esav and Yaakov were 63 at the time, and using math, he figures out that Yaakov spent 14 years studying in the yeshiva of Aver before going to Lavan. So let's see what the Sifsei Chacham, that's what he's going on. And let's see what the Sifsei Chacham says. And you'll see, in a very nice approach, he makes sense out of all this. He says, V'lamanu mikan, we could learn from here, using the math that Rashi brings down, Shenitman bebeis Aver yudalid shana, that Yaakov hid himself in the yeshiva of Aver for 14 years. Only then did he go on to Haran, to Lavan's house. The Kasha, I have the following question. Why here, when Yaakov needs to study for 14 years, specifically, Chazal make the point of telling us he went to the yeshiva of Aver. But earlier, when Rivka wants to speak to a prophet, and she wants to find out from God what's going on with this difficult pregnancy, Nakat Shem. There it says she specifically chose to go to Shem. The Yisrotzitzu, and then when it talks about that the babies were kicking, Nakat Shem ve'Aver. There it talks about the fact that there were two yeshivas, Shem and Aver. So what's going on? Sometimes you talk about two yeshivas, sometimes just Shem, sometimes just Aver. How do we make sense of all this? Yesh Lomar, here's the answer. The Kivan Shenakat Stam, since it just wrote plain, Vayisrotzitzu, that when she was having this difficult pregnancy, that the kids were running around, l'lamedu lahoros, that's to teach us, kishahocha lebatei midrashos, when she would pass by, plural, when she would pass by the available batei medrash, the available houses of learning about God, which were two at the time, one of Shem and one of Aver. Haya Yaakov mifraches, let's say Yaakov would struggle and kick to get out. The Shem the Aver and Shem and Aver, shtei batei midrashos hayu. They were two distinct academies. They were not the same place. How do I know this? Because it says a little bit later, it says that Yaakov ishtam yoshevo halim. He was someone who would dwell in the tents, plural. And what does it mean, ohalim? We saw Rashi says there was the ohel shel Shem and the ohel of Aver. There were two different tents. Uperish mishtama al shneim kamar. It's telling us that Yaakov, as a growing man, he learned by both of them. He went to each one's academy. So he's saying there were two distinct schools. And when she was pregnant with Yaakov and Esav, when she went by each one, Shem and Aver, Yaakov wanted to get out. When he was a young man and he was Yoshev Ohalim, he learned by each of them. Now, why, when she wants to find out what's going on, why did she specifically go to Shem? When a pasuk says she went to seek out advice from God, she's got to pick one to go to for advice, because remember, they're two separate academies. So it says, if you got to choose which two am I going to go to find out what God's plan is, it makes sense to go to Shem. He's the grandfather of Aver. He was greater than him. If I want to get a connection to God, I go to the greatest Navi I could find. I'm going to go seek out who is the biggest Navi. Shem. He was the older. He's the elder statesman. He was the one who was closer to Adam Arishon, so he's going to have a closer connection to God. So yeah, at that time, there were two Nevi'im available because there were two different base medrash. There were two different academies. Why did Rivka specifically go to Shem? Because I want an answer. I'm going to go to the best Navi that's out there. You know, everyone wants to find out who's the best. You know, I'm looking for the physician. I'm looking for the mechanic, whoever it is. I want to find out who's the best that I could go to. She wants to go to the Gadol Shabam. She wants to go to the greatest one. So why here, when we're talking about Yaakov spends 14 years in the yeshiva before going to Lavan's house, he specifically went to Aver. Why didn't he go to the greatest Talmud Chacham? Shem had already passed away. By this time, in other words, when Yaakov was a young man, he had the zechus, he had the ability, he could learn from both of them. And that's why he was Yoshev Alim. It says that he could be found in both tents, sometimes in the tent of Shem, sometimes in the tent of Aver. He could do that. But at this point, when it's 14, he's got to spend 14 years before running to Lavan's house, and he's trying to escape Esav. At this point, Shem has passed away already. We don't know exactly when in Yaakov's life. I'm sure we could figure it out. But at this point, he's already passed away. So now if he wants to go to yeshiva for 14 years, there's only one option left. It's the yeshiva of Aver. So this is what the Sifsei Chachamim does to wrap this all up. And I love this because he's making it very clear. These were two separate institutions, the yeshiva of Shem and the yeshiva of Aver. When Rivka's pregnant, she walked by each of them. And by the way, this is why, again, it's not my place to argue with the tour guides who want to identify the yeshiva and Shem and Aver up in Sfat, but this is why I highly doubt that. Because again, at this point in their lives, Yitzchak and Rivka, when they're first married, they're either living near Hebron or they're living at Beersheba. It's very unlikely they were up near Tzfat, and that's where, if she's walking around pregnant, it's very unlikely, they were on a vacation up in Tzfat when this is taking place. It's got to be that the yeshiva Shem and Aver were close to Hebron or close to Beersheba. So I would say that's where they were, despite the fact that there are different tour guides who might be trying to, point it out in various places. So this is where this was taking place, near where they're living. And that's where they're taking place as a kid. When Yaakov is growing up, he's Yoshev Ohalim. He's spending time in the yeshivas of Shem and the yeshivas of Aver. That's close to home. That's where he is. And that's where Yaakov is. And that's why there's two places. Why, when she's pregnant, did she specifically go to Shem for advice? Because she's got to seek out guidance. She wants the greatest guide she can find. Why, when Yaakov has got to hide out and learn for 14 years before going to Lavan? Why did he go to Aver? Why didn't he go to the best? By that point, unfortunately, Shem had already passed away, Aver was all that was left who he could learn from, and that's where he found himself. But I thought this was just a great Sifsei Chachamim because he's taking into account all these various accounts of the yeshivas of Shem and Aver, and he's giving us an approach how to reconcile everything, how to make sense. Why is it that there's sometimes both of them are mentioned, sometimes only one is mentioned, and that's the that was that. So Aver is a grandson of Shem, correct. So be that as it may, I hope you enjoyed some of these sources. So again, what we find what these sources are is that those first sources I thought was an incredible idea that Rav Simcha Zissel points out. That Rav Simcha Zissel is pointing out to us that the Torah is the blueprint of our world, and the way the Torah is written, both the way the story is told, by the fact that it didn't say straight out that Yaakov had gone to the yeshiva of Aver, that allowed him to remain incognito. And the fact that it was written sasum, that the parsha is written in such a fashion where there's no openings and no breaks in it, that also allowed him to remain hidden. It's not pshat that because he was hidden, that's why the Torah was fashioned this way. To the contrary, the opposite. Hashem fashioned the Torah this way in order to allow Yaakov to remain hidden. I thought that's such a cool chap. And that also explains for us that idea. He raised the question of if he's got to hide out, what was he thinking? To hide out in the base medrash? And how did Esav not find him? That should be the first place that he went to look. And this says no, because of the fact that the Torah was written this way, that dictated the reality of the world, and that allowed him to remain under the radar screen. I thought that was a very cool idea that Rav Simcha Zissel has there. Right. Layla's pointing out is that, we have this idea that when something is lost, it's there, just God hasn't opened our eyes yet. And there's a tefillah that many people have that they'll say, usually it's attributed to Rav Meir Balanes, they'll say this tefillah that everything is b'cheska sumin, we're all in the category of being blinded, ad shakadosh baruch hu meir saying until God enlightens us, until God allows us to see it. And we say when we daven, we say, "V'ha'er einenu b'sarasecha," enlighten us, light up our eyes when we learn your Torah. In other words, our answers are there. We just want to see it. We're asking God, give me the gift of being able to discover it and to see it. And this is the idea. It was there. It was hidden in plain sight. God just wouldn't allow Esav to come to the conclusion that that's where Yaakov was. And then that last idea that we had, using that Sisei Chachamim, we went through all the various places where Shem and Aver and the yeshiva of Shem, and then Aver, just where they're all mentioned, sometimes together, sometimes individually, one and not the other, and vice versa. That Sisei Chachamim allows us a good mahalach, a good approach. How do we make sense and reconcile everything? And I thought that was very interesting. I'm gonna stop the recording here.